All right, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Jared Moore here on Thursday. It is Thursday, the 29th day of January. The prep tip today is to read the following book. If you follow the protocols in the book, you can't get cancer. Protocols I've been using every day for a quarter century. The title of the book is World Without Cancer by G. Edward Griffin. I say again, World Without Cancer by G. Edward Griffin. We have patient waiting agreement, my friend, Dr. Lynn Horowitz. He has many websites. Yes, I do complimentary refer to him as a man with his brain on fire. Start out with the following website, drlynnhorowitz.com. Then check out warandwethepeople.net. And if you like some great music while you're working or just relaxing, 528radio.com. Good morning, doctor.
Good morning, John. Great to be with you again.
Good to have you with us, sir. Well, we got some serious winter in my part of the world. Overnight lows below zero a couple of days ago, a little warmer today. 10 inches of snow, and the snow won't melt for at least a week because the temperatures won't be warm enough. But we'll get through it. And of course, you're in Florida, where the snow is a pretty rare occurrence, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's been pretty cold down here the last couple of days. How's that for global warming?
Well, Al Gore made a fool of himself at the World Economic Forum, still preaching the lies that he's been putting out for more than 20 years. And on Facebook, I noticed that Exxon is promoting how they're reducing CO2. They still haven't figured out high school science yet, have they, sir?
Yeah, that's very, very true. They're so ridiculous now. Uh, in the video that I just produced, make the comment that this whole realm of science is absolutely distorted. The true science is actually well presented, let's say, in the Bible. And the whole concept of us needing drugs and vaccines and medical deities and the science world to tell us about carbon emissions, this whole concept. Think about this. We're carbon six beings.
That's right.
So this movement towards zero carbon, which is what Bill Gates had talked about and lectured on at the TED conference, saying that we need to reduce carbon emissions to zero or near zero, and that the human beings would need to be depopulated, and we would need to reduce the population by about 15% by simply giving people vaccinations. This whole concept is genocidal. I mean, that's not a exaggeration of what the issue is here. This concept of carbon being the source of the degeneration of the atmosphere and global warming or weather change.
Well, real science shows us that hundreds of years ago, we had a much higher CO2 content and a lush green planet. What's wrong with that?
Well, it's all a fraud. It's
Right.
racketeering enterprise, organized crime. It's the same thing in politics today. We're watching the unfolding of the news in Minneapolis and actually California and elsewhere. And New York, the amount of fraud that's intertwined in government is despicable. It's insane. To have this continue to go on. And I am one of the conscientious objectors currently, who say that the Justice Department is lagging behind. There's a host of people, particularly the CIA. I've been calling for it to be terminated. They need to completely change the entire operation, because it's always been in the hands from its inception, right following World War II, of deep state. You've got the multinational corporate banksters. Again, another classic example of the lies that we buy is like Elon Musk is the wealthiest man on the planet.
That we know publicly, right?
It's ridiculous. And the wealthiest people on the planet have to be intertwined with the Rockefellers and all their trusts, their entire operations, the foundations that they established to hide their money and then conduct the same criminal enterprise that we're witnessing through organizations like the American Red Cross, supposedly the good people, the good organizations that are benefiting society. It's hogwash. It's a complete fraud. And so when we deal with science, I'm looking at the same thing, and that is a very important message in the tutorial. The You Are the Music tutorial on YouTube, if they put in search for Dr. Leonard G. Horowitz on YouTube, they'll come up with my most recent videos and look for You Are the Music tutorial. And it blows science and medicine out of the universe. It goes way beyond what we're given, we're fed. We're human beings who have been dumbed down. The entire civilization. I'm looking at English and I'm looking at its origin in Hebrew. And I'm looking at, most importantly, how God creates using language of mathematics. And so mathematics, you get into the science of the biology and everything that is involved in our own bodies, including especially body water. We're about 80% water. And the whole concept of water being a liquid crystal, superconductor of sound and light signaling. Now you've got an energy. We, the people, our Holy Spirit-filled temple, blow out manipulation or the manipulations in science, and they give you the truth. Now you integrate, when you talk about the truth, you talk about Jesus. You talk about Jesus as quoting himself. He says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. Now, wow, you engage. What does that mean in terms of mathematics and science? What does that really mean? What does spirituality and what does our communion divine really mean? And reflecting on what we're given and told from the science world or the world of news reporting, we have to compare and contrast the truth, our life, our lives, our spiritual life, our souls, because that was what Jesus' whole mission was. It was to save souls, you know. And so once you start to get engaged in that discussion now, and you know, you refer to me as a guy whose brain is on fire, where my brain is always kind of like trying to figure out, how does God work? How does prayer work? How does faith intertwine with the miracle making of prayer? How all of these dynamics operate is basically musically, mathematically. So that's why the tutorial and the preview is titled You Are the Music. And I conclude and I lay out the evidence in the video that we are instruments. We're literally the instruments of the Creator. And our souls are programmed mathematically by the voice, the language of the Creator, mathematics, just like artificial intelligence. And when I started to compare, and I even challenged Grok and ChatGPT, you know, kind of like they're programmed to give you a certain amount of intelligence, but they don't go into the depths. And I have to challenge, if you're going to use artificial intelligence, you actually have to challenge them when they give you false information or omissions that are substantive. You challenge the artificial intelligence. And I've even called it stupid. You know, I go, Grok, you're an idiot. Come on, give me the basics, the fundamentals. And suddenly now it goes into hyperdrive.
Really?
Yeah, and I have a scientific paper. You know, I'm basically dealing with deep state's suppression of intelligence for autistic children and families. You know, we're looking at Minneapolis, and the news coming out of Minneapolis is how they've defrauded even the autistic families and the children in precluding them by their fraud and their theft. They've precluded services to the autistic families and children.
That's horrible.
Despicable. I mean, this is not, it's unconscionable. And it violates the essence of what God's program in us. One another point in the tutorial is that your heart, which is more powerful than your head, far more. In fact, the Heart Math Institute has done substantial research over many, many decades now, which talks about how the energy frequency of your heart, which we talk about in terms of 528 frequency. Now, when Jesus says, I am the way, and it's a narrow way, I liken that to a radio station, a particular channel. When you're on, let's say, 528.0 channel, that's particular. And when you go to 529 or 530 or even 532, you get static. You don't get that clear channel broadcast when you change your radio station even 1/10 of 1 hertz. So that's the same with your heart in prayer and faith. There are certain values, the values of human beings. What's the value in the heart? Love, yes. Joy, yes. Uplifted hearts, faith in the heart, not in the head necessarily. The head operates like a mechanism. And there's the part that was designated ego. This whole concept of Freudian psychotherapy, this whole concept of Freud being engaged in a deception, in a fraud, because it doesn't engage this holistic model of a human being. Your ego mind, which is the voice in the back of your head virtually. You've heard the saying, let your conscience be your guide. And you've heard of people saying there's intuition, and you might get an instinctive feeling that initially when you meet somebody or you engage in an opportunity or a situation where you get a red flag going up, a check in your heart, that's saying I got a check in my heart. This is what I'm talking about. It's not in your head. What's happening with the Freudian concept of ego is it's a mechanism. It's a survival mechanism. It's mechanical, stimulus response, and it is conditionable. This is what the news media lays out on us. This is what we're actually conditioned by repeating frightful messages. When you look at the content of news, headline news, very little is uplifting. Very, very, like what do they give you? Maybe a minute of some uplifting story at the end of an hour-long program of bad news. And so what they're actually doing, you see, it's programmed. It's called a program, and the anchors, the hosts are called anchors. What does that mean? Why is it called an anchor? Well, you go into Harvard's whole psychology, neuro-linguistic programming. Neuro, that's nerves. Linguistic, language. Programming. This is what it engages. So this whole concept of the abuse of science and the disgusting, despicable human damage that it's causing us, keeping us from the whole spiritual dynamics of what God intended and programmed our souls to actually celebrate and administer, this whole concept of service. Now, think about the power of love, for example. How many love songs have been written by all the artists throughout the ages?
Thousands.
How important is love?
Right.
And so you start to look at, okay, if love, as we're talking about, is a frequency of mathematics and it's a program of our souls, as well as our consciousness, this intelligence deals with higher consciousness. It deals with literally Jesus's ministry to save souls. What does that mean? It means that you really engage it, honor it, celebrate it, and in the process have divine communion.
I engage divine life in Love 528.
Communication with Jesus, real time. Like you pray all the time. Why? Because Jesus hears you. I pray all the time. Likewise, Jesus hears us, God hears us. The Father and Son are operating in sync.
Your faith is required to commune with us in the Love 528 creative dimension.
They're completely synced. This is how Jesus modeled miraculous healing, because you're nothing missing, nothing broken in the kingdom of heaven. So you bring that love, that channel, that energy, that 528 frequency into your body. That's why I call 528 the clear channel broadcast to God, Yeshua, Jesus.
We invite your love in our relationship and kinship.
And Dr. Horowitz, you've been using your energy cleaner. Give us an update, if you would, please.
Sure, John. Yeah, I love it. And it's really related to this topic that we're talking about, this whole concept of the scientific world being a fraud versus God's technology for, let's say, miraculous healing. You know, the energy cleaner, I've been using it and I'm enjoying it. I'm thankful to you for bringing it to the market with a 528 frequency, because I know that I can sleep at night being surrounded and being energized by that frequency of pure tone love. It's for those who are just joining us and, you know, basically thinking about what is 528 and how is it connected to love and prayer and faith, you know, the values of the heart. You know, I call it those who are vibing to that energy, that frequency, are in the zone of bliss, in the zone of bliss. And that's important when you're sleeping on the energy cleaner mattress pad, which is what I purchased and I'm enjoying. I have full knowledge now and faith that I'm being surrounded by the most powerful, miraculous healing energy in the universe. And I make that claim, I make that statement based on the fact that you're dealing in the language of God, math. You're dealing with a mathematical matrix, which is really musical. You know, I liken it to the master conductor, God, you know, the master conductor, master composer of the universal orchestra, who's constantly singing love songs. And I'm making the claim it's the key, 528, the note, the key, the musical note of 528 is in the original musical scale, the solfeggio scale. Today it's do, re, mi. It used to be ut, re, mi. Mi stands for miragistorum in Latin, miracles in English. So it's the miracle. So I'm sleeping on the mattress pad, the energy cleaner, and I am aware and thankful that I'm all night long
being energetically blessed.
You know, I'm sure you probably do the same. I go to sleep. I go to sleep at night. Do you pray before you go to bed?
I do. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And do you also pray in the morning when you wake up and give thanks for the day?
I do. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Isn't that a beautiful practice? I do the same thing. So, you know, I go to sleep at night with the miracle frequency entering my body via the energy cleaner, the mattress pad I'm using. And it accommodates everything that I know to be true about the glory and power of God and Jesus and healing. Now, this was the most wonderful thing, I think, when I read the Bible about Jesus's ministry. You know, he had a hard time convincing people, you know, especially the hypocrites in the temple. But what did he do? What did he do to actually prove himself and to actually show the power and glory of God that he was actually modeling? He healed people. The miracle healings and the raising of Lazarus, for example, from the dead, healing the blind, healing the lame. That's what caught people's attention. That's what convinced them that he was legitimate as the Messiah. That's why we have Christianity today, and that was initially called the Way. It wasn't called Christianity. It was the Way as a part of Judaism, of the whole concept of, he was heavily into the metaphysics. When you study Jesus and what he was doing and modeling, it engages the metaphysics. You know, you have physics, which deals with this subject of the corruption of science today, going back to the initial comment on the weather changing, and the whole concept of their global warming, which is a fraud, the Green New scam. This whole concept is based on fundamentals in physics. Now, physics relies on mathematics, God's language. The first science book, I'm condemning science. I am so disgusted with the fraudulent, quote, peer-reviewed publications that come out of Nature New Medicine, where they gave us the fraud that COVID was not from a lab, it was from nature. That's Nature New Medicine. The Lancet, the frauds that have been perpetrated through Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine. I read that crap. I read the crap. And what I do always is I go to the acknowledgement section to see who financed it.
Right.
And when you see the bias in all of science, you're disgusted. And especially when you consider the connection to the metaphysics. So you have physics in mathematics in the science world, and you have metaphysics in the spiritual dynamics of Jesus's ministry, of God's literally administration of the universe. Musically, mathematically, it's administered. It's literally, as I mentioned, it has programmed your soul with certain values, certain human values that, if you want to look at what's the trouble with civilization today and society, heavily now in the news and the media in America, you look at this whole manipulation of consciousness, programming of the human brains to be not programmed like God.
With faith,
we're programmed into fear. We're programmed, the back of your head, you've got that voice that challenges us. Oh, how are we going to pay these bills? How are we going to survive? That's a survival mechanism of the ego.
Right.
Alternatively, you go into what Jesus was preaching and modeling, demonstrating the miraculous realm. That's the metaphysics. Now, the first book in science, to give you an indication of the fundamental, the beginning of the fraud. When you go to physics, that's the first book. It was called, in science, the first science book was called Physics. And that was based on Aristotle. It was his work that was engaging the ancient mystery school Pythagorean mathematics, the foundation.
Love 528 is the universal healing constant.
The ancient mystery school Pythagorean mathematicians that included Da Vinci, Vitruvius, Plato, Aristotle, you had a knowledge that exactly what I'm talking about, where everything in creation is math, and everything in creation is created by God's math, God's language. So the Bible we now interpret, it's the word. The word is sound. Sound is produced by our lips. It's a solfeggio note, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. The la note is the labiatum, the lips, the creative instruments. So you've got the spoken word, the Bible, which is a living Bible. It's not just words on paper. It's alive. It has a resonant energy, but most importantly, really, it talks to us specifically. I don't know about you, John, but when I want to have some
revelation or
divine download, and I prayed for insight into a problem, I go to the Bible and I say to God, I pray to God and I say, show me in your word the answer to my question. And so many times I will open the Bible directly to a verse that triggers for me the next thing that I need to know in order to get an intelligence on the matter. But at any rate, the first book in science was called Physics by Aristotle. The root word was philos, love, love. So the fundamental of science deals with this understanding of musical mathematics, and Jesus is the way, narrow, frequency, specific energy. Now you're talking about every single commercial you just ran. during the break. You had the energy cleaner, which we've been talking about. The energy cleaner outputting frequency resonant of pure love. That color behind me, for those who are viewing this on video, see the aurora borealis, that green color, the color of grass. Why grass is green, why chlorophyll gives us the breath of life, oxygen, green, chlorophyll, plant world, giving us the life. The Bible talks in the end, the leaves of the trees. You had a commercial dealing with cayenne pepper, and you had garlic, cayenne garlic. Why is that product excellent? Because cayenne is the most bitter herbs, where the bitterness is caused by negatively charged electrons. The bitters, not the sweets. The sweets are the opposite. They're acid formers. That's why sugar is poison. But the actual cayenne and garlic, they're kind of like bitter. What is the bitterness? The taste of your tongue to bitter is your tongue is being inundated with negatively charged alkalizing electrons. Energy, the source of energy universally, is this negatively charged electrons. You know, even I mentioned 80% approximately of your body is water.
Right.
Water is the liquid crystal superconductor. I call it liquid God. It's throughout the universe. NASA science has proven water in deep space. They've filmed ice crystals in deep space, in rocks under Mars, water. Well, this whole concept of how does the word, the sound, the language, the intelligence, the administrative power of God and Jesus in the miracle making, how does that come? It comes through negatively charged electrons that are vibrating in certain frequencies. That's God's language. That's the creative instrument. And then we receive this, and we become the creative instruments. And what's the purpose?
Human service, to serve each other meaningfully. That's the
Value. You had another commercial on home is where the heart is.
Right.
Is where you need to have warmth. What is warmth? The energy of this device that you're selling. It is absolutely connected to this whole concept. It's the practical application. You are warmed by negatively charged electrons, and that your heart, this is warming. I talked about the values of your heart. What's the values? What is programmed into your soul are the values in your heart. I mentioned joy, love, faith, bravery, Braveheart. These are the values. Now, look at society today. Look at the degeneration. They have not only become anti-God, but they're anti-values. The insanity and the hypocrisy. Are men men or women women? The whole confusion. This is the programming of society, of civilization into insanity and hypocrisy and damaging manipulation of we the people, so that no matter where you look, just like Aristotle said, everything is about the subject of love. The first science book is physics, philos, love. This whole is the way. This is why Jesus was preaching the amount of love related to miraculous healing that Jesus modeled, because it is the truth. It is the way if you want to celebrate your life and have prosperity in all great ways. That, you know, the concept of prosperity, that's the agreement, that's your contract. You give your faith and trust over to God and Yeshua Jesus, and suddenly now your life suddenly shifts. You become born again, the whole concept of being born again. It's like what happens when you get baptized in the Spirit. You become born again. You enter into what Jesus was all about, this realm of divine blessing and prospering from faith which opens the key. It is the key, I call it the key of the house of David in Isaiah 22:22 and Revelation 3:6-8.
I tune my harp to the key of Love 528 to soothe souls and heal my enemies.
It's heralded to open these doors to divine communion. They're spiritual. They're not physical doors, they're metaphysical. They're spiritual portals to divinity, to divine communion, and then the fulfillment of the capacity. This is the essential knowledge that's required. You know, we're blessed and honored to be delivering this intelligence to the audience here today. This is the fundamental, most important intelligence on the planet, metaphysically, spiritually, scientifically, even mathematically. It's the most important intelligence. It's necessary for how we win in the end of the Bible. It's absolutely a celebration of how we win by really fully understanding, comprehending, you know, the whole concept of understanding, standing under, you know, this is in the courts of law. You have understanding. They ask you, do you really understand the charges against you? Likewise, you understand your standing is under this divine realm instead of this insane realm. And you're engaged in this fully with your heart as well as your head. You align your head. This is why all of the great ministers, preachers, the spiritualists recommend you do not engage in fear in your head. You engage in faith in your heart. And that's where you then are able to have this connection, communication, divine, and that's where salvation, you want to save. We're not just talking about physical salvation, although that's what we're buying products, the energy cleaner, the cayenne pepper and garlic, nutraceuticals, all of my products on healthyworldstore.com dealing with 528 frequency. Wonderful physical salvation, sustenance. But we're talking about what Jesus was talking about. You want to save your soul? You want to be eternal? You want to experience eternal life? That has been a foreign and confusing topic that is completely made understandable when you integrate this intelligence. That's what is needed by civilization to engage 1,000 years of world peace. That is why I'm sharing this intelligence, why you're broadcasting it with RBN today, because it's vitally important for the evolution of civilization and the protection and sustenance of we the people, of what God celebrates. We were created by God to do what? To degenerate? To rely on the gods of science that take us away? Or
were we
actually programmed to celebrate our relationship with Jesus and God in that spirit? When you look at science, another deception in science. Oh, we go ahead now with stem cells. Stem cells, we're going to inject stem cells into order to regenerate your tissues and have miraculous healings that have never been able to
be accomplished.
Study the science of stem cell differentiation and development. You realize it's all energy. It goes back to the energy cleaner. It goes back to specific frequencies, such as the miracle frequency, do, re, mi, miragestorm in Latin, miracles in English. The miracle 528 frequency is actually causing the stem cell differentiation, that particular energy of that Holy Spirit power of love. Why is love called the universal healer? Hello, Jesus. Hello, what we're talking about, divine communion. Hello, what we're talking about, this whole concept that science is fraud. It's a fraud, and it's manipulated and administered by a racketeering enterprise, a crime syndicate globally. That's what Trump is embattled with when he talks about deep state, and I'm still highly uncomfortable with embracing even, the concept of what Kennedy did yesterday, changing 21 members of the Autistic Commission to study what's causing autism? Well, we know what causes autism, mostly from the mercury toxicity in the brain that's been injected via vaccinations. They haven't fully eliminated the aluminum, which is linked to brain damage, neurological impairments,
Alzheimer's.
heavy metal poisoning, mercury, heavy. So this is, a manipulation of science, which is despicable.
And you retards believed me.
It's completely bullshit. It's total crap. And what's real is what God wants us to grasp is this whole concept
Of natural healing.
that we are the music. We are the instruments being played. We were programmed with the values of being a human being. Our souls are programmed, and our souls are eternal. Our souls. And if you maintain that connection, communion divine with this whole understanding, you celebrate it, you engage it, you practice it with prayer and even products. The whole concept of the energy cleaner, the whole concept of the electroceuticals, not just nutraceuticals, nutritional supplements. Go to healthyworldstore.com and you see what I have modeled. You model the great healing, the blessings of how God works. God, musically, mathematically, energetically works, extending this discussion into this mercury toxicity and autistic spectrum disorders. I have a paper that deals with 528 frequency and its use in therapeutics for autism and Alzheimer's disease. You love listening, just like I do, to 528radio.com. And exercise. Go for a walk. And when the music comes on, walk to the tempo of the music. Exercise. When you're exercising, you're breathing in oxygen. There's your antioxidants. Oxygen is an antioxidant. It's negatively charged electrons. You want to defeat cancer? You want to get miraculously healed? You basically breathe the breath of life. That's how God get Adam and Eve off the ground. He breathed the breath of life. Again, green 528 from the chlorophyll. I am recommending that, just like I do with the energy cleaner, for all of the autistic children, for all the people who are suffering with this neurological impairment. Of course, we need to detox the mercury, the aluminum. Of course, we need to regenerate the probiotics in your gut, because that's, again, your nutrients are coming through your gut. And if it's poisoned and you don't have the microbes to be able to assimilate the nutrients and the micronutrients, you're in trouble. Of course, you have to do those holistic strategies for autistic spectrum disorders, but also you've got to engage the brains. And for Alzheimer's, for 528 Music, 528therapy.com. That's another website I have, 528therapy.com. Awesome website. And there you'll see that I have placed audio as well as the 528 frequency color to radiate your body, resonate your body. And then basically that's another healing modality, practically applying this intelligence that we've been talking about here.
Doctor, thank you very much. Have a great week. We'll be back next Thursday. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. God bless you, John. Thanks.
Okay. We got a top of the hour break. We're back with my friend Dan Sutterfield.